So, when it comes to Cecil Stedman, the circumstances in which Cecil Stedman first joined the Global Defense Agency is clouded by misinformation, but several facts present themselves upon close examination. He was an exemplary field agent from the beginning and was often sent into the most dangerous situations. Most of these involved individuals that possessed superhuman abilities. Over the course of his adventures, Cecil developed a close working relationship with the superhuman agent Brit. The two came to depend on one another. Cecil's racked up an impressive string of successful operations until he encountered the Order of the Freeing Fist. The Order had a simple plan. They took over a heavily industrialized area and planned on detonating a bomb. It would release the highly toxic chemical X throughout an unnamed area in North America. They believed that the resulting deaths would inspire the nation's youth to live life to the fullest, knowing that each and every moment might be their last. Cecil failed to stop them from executing their plan and was captured by them. It was only the last-minute appearance of Brit that forced them to prematurely trigger their bomb and succumb to their own weapon. Unfortunately, Cecil was at ground zero, having been bound to the weapon. Thus, he received a full dose of the highly caustic chemical X. The entirety of his skin was eaten and burnt by the vicious attack. Cecil's will to survive outweighed the damage done to his body, and with the aid of the highly advanced medical technology possessed by the GDA, he survived the experience. Weeks passed, and when he had recovered, the only sign that anything had even happened to him was a patch of scarred tissue on his face. But Stedman demanded that they leave it intact to remind him of the price of his one failure in the field. Soon, Cecil returned to active duty. His life returned to a semblance of normalcy until the Pentagon itself was attacked by the Lizard League. While the League was indiscriminately murdering any and all members of the GDA they came across, Cecil was attempting to escape the confines of their headquarters with Director Radcliffe in tow. Unfortunately for them both, they encountered the League's most vicious killer, Komodo Dragon, before they could slip away. Cecil attempted to fend off Komodo with his sidearm, but the weapon had absolutely no effect on the lizard-themed warrior. Cecil steeled himself for what was to come, but before Komodo could strike, he was attacked by the Order of the Freeing Fist. Shock played over Cecil's face as he watched the supposedly dead terrorists that ruined his life and body render Komodo unconscious. He turned a stunned look to Director Radcliffe, who hesitantly explained that he had faked the Order's death in order to enable them to come and work for the agency. Their crimes had been pardoned in return for their allegiance. Cecil disagreed vigorously, and with 2 swift shots gunned down the members of the Order. He was taken into immediate custody by the GDA and remained there for several months, but Cecil was eventually released by Director Radcliffe when Radcliffe was looking for a replacement for himself. With time, and most likely many conversations, Radcliffe had convinced Cecil that at times it was necessary to work with devils in order to preserve the greater good. With that, Cecil became the most powerful man on the planet. He began to cultivate his growing influence and power and struck up partnerships with several of the heroes that walked the earth. He made an arrangement with the viltrumite agent Omni-man. That allowed the GDA to direct his adventures to areas and threats that only he could handle. It was despite the fact that he realized early on that Omni-man's heroism wasn't as altruistic as he claimed it was. Stedman also worked closely with the Guardians of the Globe, and he eventually became their handler of sorts. In the present era, he and the GDA led an operation to check out the Guardians of the Globe, where they find them all dead, and Omni-man lays next to them, injured as well. A door opens and invisible agents arrive at the scene, followed by paramedics, who are shocked and disgusted. They find Omni-man is alive and move the bodies out from the room. Cecil mentions he had never seen anything like it and bangs his fist against a table in a rage. When Debbie Grayson and Mark make it to Nolan's room, where they see Nolan lying without responding, Cecil introduces himself and tells them that they have no idea who did it. Debbie tells him that he has some nerve, but he tells them that the Guardians had been murdered and they were unable to bring them back, with Nolan being the only survivor. Cecil tells them that the news will eventually spread, but he wanted them to know first. Debbie asks for materials and refuses to leave Nolan, mentioning that she had patched him up for 20 years. Donald gets a report that there was an undergoing attack with multiple casualties, and Mark leaves to go help out. After Teen Team fought the Flaxons, Cecil tells Robot that they had done well, but had not achieved a victory since 338 people had died. Robot reveals that the aliens called themselves the Flaxons and had 6 ideas as to why they had left. However, he saw a tank that the Flaxons had used and noted that the alloy of which the tank was comprised should take years to corrode and oxidize, which meant that time ran faster where they came from. Cecil asks how Invincible had done, and he mentions that he seems unprepared. Cecil says that he would need his help and leaves. Cecil asks Donald for some good news, but he tells his boss that whoever had killed the Guardians had turned off the cameras and security systems. Cecil complains that what he had said was not good news and tells everybody to get out. He tells the demon detective Damien Darkblood to reveal himself. Darkblood looks around and tells Cecil everything he knows. Cecil tells Darkblood to have at it and let him know if he needs help. Later, when Alan the alien visited, Cecil went to Omni-man and his family and told them that they had seen somebody from Mars approaching Earth. Debbie refused to let Omni-man do it, so Mark offered to do it himself. Nolan told him to knock some sense into the guy and send him back where he came from. While Mark fights Alan, Nolan tells Cecil what he remembers from the night the Guardians were killed. He tells him that he had gotten a distress call from the Guardians, but everything seemed fine when he had gotten there. However, the lights had gone out and he fought against the enemy until he passed out. Cecil is not convinced and says that he had never seen Nolan lose like that, but believed that somebody was acting clever. At the Guardian's funeral, Cecil calls Robot and tells him that he ran a mean superhero team. Robot thanked him, and Cecil offered him a job at the GDA so he could build him a new Guardians of the Globe, only answering to him. Robot asked if Omni-man would not be the better choice, but Cecil mentioned that after a decade of trying to make him an official Guardian, he still refused to take orders from him. Amber and Mark have a date, who picks up a book William had brought. Mark nervously introduced himself as a comic fan. Amber asks what his favorite is, so Mark starts talking about them. Amber asks if she can borrow one, which Mark agrees to. Mark's phone rings and he hangs up, but he is called once again, so he turns his phone off. He is surprised when he is called yet again, so he picks up and Cecil pops out from his phone. Relieved that Amber has left, Mark asks Cecil if he has been spying on him, but Cecil tells him that if he wants to be a hero, privacy is not an option. Mark points out that he did not even work for him, but Cecil counters by telling him he never would if he never showed respect or decided if he wanted to be a hero. Mark is forced to decide then, and he says he does want to be a hero. Cecil hands him a comm device and tells him Eve would be there as well. Cecil tells him that he needs to go to Mount Rushmore, which Mark does not know where to find. Amber walks back in, and Mark makes up a lame excuse to leave. Invincible and Atom Eve flew towards Mount Rushmore. As they did, Cecil told them that he would not be asking for their help, but Omni-man was busy, and the new Guardians were a shit show. He tells them their target was Doc Seismic, who was doing things that made no sense. They believe that the gloves cause him a concussion every time he uses them. Donald tells Cecil that the monster that Omni-man had taken care of was impressive, since it was not an easy battle, and added that the beast might not be dead, and Cecil told him to put it on ice. As Debbie cooked dinner, Nolan threw a piece of the monster, asking if she wanted calamari. She tells him to get it off the counter while laughing, and asks if he had called Cecil about putting some protection on the house, but he tells her he had been busy but would do it later. He told her that he was a badass since he had defeated a kaiju, and she told him that she was one as well, since she had sold a house that had a double homicide. Cecil asks Robot for an update on the team. Robot tells him they have work to do, but he feels confident about what they have done so far. Later, when new Guardians of the Globe move into their new base, Rex tells Cecil that he had missed a spot when cleaning blood, but Cecil tells them that he had left that there as a reminder and would get cleaned off when they proved themselves to be worthy of the heroes that had come before. Soon, he is radioed and told that Omni-man wants to see him, so he leaves. Amber and Mark head back to the former's home. She tells him to plan the date next time, which he likes. The two lean in for a kiss, and Mark flies into the sky happily and heads back home. He finds Cecil and his parents talking about NASA's first manned mission to Mars and needs Nolan to shadow the mission so that nothing goes wrong. But Nolan would not do it since he needs to train his son and is needed on Earth with the Guardians gone. Cecil tells Nolan that Earth needs a win, but Nolan tells him that nobody would care about Mars if there was an attack on Earth, saying that his priority was his family and the planet. Mark volunteers, saying that the same thing happened last time, but Nolan tells him that that was the moon, which hardly counts as space. He added that his responsibilities were bigger than 4 astronauts. Cecil says that if Mark wanted to go, he would be doing a great favor, so Nolan asks Debbie for support. She says that she does not like Mark missing school, but it would be for a good cause. Mark says that he could go to Mars and back in a second, and Nolan mentions that the fact that he did not know how far Mars was exactly why he should go to school. Cecil tells Mark that it was a 2-week mission, and Mark agrees with his father, saying that he was not ready and had things going well with Amber. Debbie tells Mark that many people would tell him how to use his powers, but it would be up to him to make those decisions. After that, Mark agrees to go, so Cecil tells him to pack a lunch since he would be leaving the next day. Cecil teleports into the house in front of the Graysons, and Donald asks how Mark going would help them with investigating Omni-man. Cecil simply responds that sending Mark would give them a chance to see what Mark could do, and if his heart was in the right place. In space, Cecil told Invincible that he needed him to stay out of sight unless something went wrong, and also needed him on the mission for the Martians, who lived underground and kept to themselves. Back in the Graysons, an orchid freezes as Damien Darkblood shows up and looks around. He takes notes and sees Cecil is there as well, with cops who point guns at the demon. Cecil tells Darkblood that Nolan had warned them about him. Later, after a devastating battle, Invincible and the Guardians faced against Machine Head. GDA doctors look at Mark and mention he was losing too much blood. Cecil arrives at the scene and is horrified by what he sees. He tells the doctors to save him since they needed Invincible, but also tells them to get a blood sample just in case. Machine Head is dragged away, but before he leaves the room, Cecil opens his head and takes the stolen chip. Nolan asks Cecil if Darkblood had cracked yet, but Cecil tells him that Darkblood is stubborn. When asked if Darkblood had murdered the Guardians, Cecil says that they do not know, but he wondered why he would even do it in the first place. Omni-man tells him that Darkblood is a demon. Cecil asks if Mark had not told him that he would be taking on Machine Head by himself, and is surprised to see Mark does not listen to Nolan, which is normal for teenagers from Earth. When Invincible fights D.A. Sinclair, he is thrown around while William tries talking to Rick, remembering how they were together before. Sinclair starts cutting William's arm, which makes Rick recognize William and remove part of his helmet so he could help Invincible. Sinclair tries escaping, but William chases him and punches him in the face repeatedly. When he gets up, Mark punches him again, fracturing his jaw. Invincible apologizes to Cecil for having punched Sinclair like that, but he understands and tells him he would lock Sinclair up, while doing his best for the humans who had been experimented on. Later, Debbie makes it to the GDA, where she asks Cecil why he had kept Nolan's secret from her. Cecil tells her that he could not risk Nolan finding out they knew until they knew what he was doing and how they could stop him. He says that there might be only one person who could fight Omni-man. He asks her where Mark is, but she tells him it would not happen. Soon, Debbie and Cecil watch the house blow up from the GDA. Debbie realizes Nolan would find Mark and says that she does not know what he will do. Cecil tells her that they needed to find Mark before Nolan did. Cecil tells the Guardians to be quiet and sit tight until they were called. Rex is desperate and says they needed to know what was happening, which Black Samson agrees with. The GDA found that Mark was flying with Eve, but also saw that Omni-man was 6 minutes away from Mark's location, which worries Cecil. Debbie asks why he could not use his teleporter, and Cecil explains that they need to wear a bracelet and that it cannot do all of them at once, and he says they need to buy some time. Nolan flies, but is struck down by an enormous beam of light coming from a satellite in space, which manages to bring him down and many animals around him. However, he soon gets up once again, resisting the beam's energy and destroying the satellite. Cecil comments that $400 billion had just been used on a nosebleed. Omni-man went back to going after Mark and Eve, while Cecil told them he would use his teleporter. Mark and Eve hear the explosion from afar, and Eve tells him that they should call Cecil. He tells her that it was not their problem anymore, since she had run away from Rex and being a superhero. However, she tells him that she did not ignore the world when it needed her. He says that the world was fine without him, but she tells him that he should do something to help and leaves. Nolan is shot at by Cecil. He tries to grab him, but Cecil disappears just before Nolan grabs him. Nolan tells him to keep out of it, but Cecil says that he could not do that, asking why he had killed the Guardians. He tells him that he never needed their help since they were weak, but Cecil points out that they had been his friends as he had once, and suggests that there had to be a reason. He tells him that Debbie deserved an answer, and tells Nolan that he had fooled her and all of them during 20 years. He asks Nolan if Mark knows, which worries him, but Nolan realizes Cecil was just wasting his time. Cecil then calls Nolan a lying piece of shit and leaves not before Omni-man gets most of his red tie. When Cecil leaves, Nolan is attacked by Sinclair's cyborgs, who put up a fight with him as he tries to get them off. He fights the monsters and rips them apart. Cecil, D.A. Sinclair and Debbie watch Nolan's fight in horror as he starts ripping the bodies apart. Agents also tell Cecil that Eve and Mark were moving towards Nolan's location, which worries Cecil. When Nolan defeats the fallen soldiers, he places the camera inside their guts, which makes people at the GDA retch in disgust and makes Sinclair angry. Nolan faces another monster on his way to Mark, which he tells Cecil he had defeated already. Cecil, however, told him the monster now felt no pain and was now juiced up with every drug, enhancement and upgrade available. Soon, 2 news helicopters went to Omni-man's fight. The Guardians say they should help, but Cecil tells them to stay where they are until he told them to move, because if nothing went well, they would be their last hope against Omni-man. Nolan fights the monster, while Debbie tells Cecil to call Eve's phone since she was with Mark again. As Nolan was about to be eaten, Mark punches the creature and sends it flying. Eve gets called by Debbie and asks what was happening. Nolan awoke, and Mark happily told him it was about time they teamed up together. When the creature rose, Cecil tells Eve not to help them and get to Guardians HQ. Mark and Nolan had a hard time with the creature. Debbie tells him to call it off, but Cecil says he could not do that since Mark could be allies with his father. After that, Debbie mentions that was why she had always hated him, which Cecil sympathizes with. Soon, Cecil is told that a new object was approaching Omni-man's location, turning out to be the Immortal, who immediately starts hitting him furiously. Omni-man catches one of his punches and mentions that he should have stayed dead, and then rips the Immortal apart. So after this, Omni-man and Invincible start fighting. Cecil tracks Nolan and Mark as they fight, and Debbie tells him that they needed to stop them both from killing one another. When asked what they could do, Cecil admits that they could not do much to stop Nolan except distract him until Mark thought of something. Once the battle finishes, a helicopter reaches Mark's location, where he lies without responding. Debbie and Cecil get off the helicopter and are horrified after looking at Mark. When Debbie leaves the hospital room, she starts crying until Cecil approaches her, telling her they wanted to keep Omni-man's secret identity so that she and Mark would be safe. He tells her that Nolan Grayson had died when the house across the street exploded from a gas leak, and while Nolan's travel books always sold well, there would be a significant spike after his death, which would leave her and Mark good with money. He tells her that her life and Mark's would go back to somewhat normal, and she tells him that everything he was doing was very kind. He tells her that Nolan had been acting in secret and he had never seen it, so he was trying to make things as right as possible. Cecil tells Mark he had done a good job and wished it had been a dream, but would let Mark leave in 2 days. Mark tells Cecil he had seen his father fly away and asks where he had gone. He asks Cecil if he would tell him what had happened, but Cecil told him it depended on whether he wanted to be a hero or not anymore, but Mark did not know the answer. He follows Cecil into a white room where he tells Mark that Debbie had heard everything. Mark asks how he could have let his mother hear everything, but admitted she deserved to know the truth. He tells Mark both him and Debbie knew about what Nolan had done to the Guardians, but they were waiting to see if there was a good reason behind it. Mark asks where they were, and Mark finds they are in a lab where Immortal is being brought back to life. Cecil tells Mark that nobody had the ability to see the things in the room and tells him that they needed a replacement for Omni-man. However, Mark tells him that he could not do it yet, even as Cecil tried to convince him. Cecil takes Mark and Debbie back home and tells them that he had called their school and work explaining everything, telling them if they needed anything else to let him know. Cecil is later overseeing the construction of more upgraded Reaniman by D.A. Sinclair as a viltrumite countermeasure. From that point forward, much of Cecil's life was focused on trying to rein in and control the impulsive viltrumite hero. Unlike Omni-man, Invincible was both impulsive and defiant. If he felt the situation warranted it, he would ignore Cecil's authority and commands despite the fact that he technically worked for him. Despite this, Cecil didn't simply release the young man from his control. Invincible was simply too valuable, and more importantly powerful, to allow to roam freely without supervision. In the meantime, Cecil continued to build his power base. He supplemented his forces with some of the murderous villains that Invincible himself had captured. He granted a form of amnesty to the formerly psychotic sidekick Darkwing, and to D.A. Sinclair, the creator of the Reaniman, as well. He put the two criminals to work secretly as he realized that public knowledge of their freedom would be sure to cause friction with his peers and employees. Eventually, the Guardians and Invincible found themselves facing a situation that they could not overcome alone. Cecil had to make a call, and he chose to reveal his secret reserve force and unleashed Darkwing and Sinclair's Reaniman into the fray. Their timely aid allowed Invincible and his allies to turn the tide and win the battle, but upon its completion, Invincible confronted Cecil in the Pentagon. He simply could not stomach the fact that Cecil had decided to allow murderers to go free in order to have more tools to be used to defend his interests. Cecil tried to talk his teenage agent down before he reacted with predictable violence, but found himself unable to do so. Unfortunately for Invincible, Cecil had been preparing for this precise moment from the second he found out Omni-man had been a traitor. In the second before their debate turned ugly, he triggered a sonic weapon that he had built into Invincible's communicator before it was implanted in his ear. The device caused Invincible intense pain, threw off his balance, and forced him to retreat from the Pentagon. Realizing that if he allowed the young viltrumite to escape and removed the implant, that the repercussions would be horrific, Cecil teleported after him in a series of short hops. Stedman was eventually able to catch up with him at the Guardians of the Globe's Utah headquarters. When he arrived, he gave the assembled Guardians an ultimatum: stand aside and allow him to take Invincible into custody or join him in a cell. The Guardians that were present sided with Invincible and were immediately set upon by an unleashed army of Reaniman that Cecil had prepared for just such an emergency. The fight seemed to be going in Cecil's favor until the sonic weapon that he had used to incapacitate Invincible was jammed. As a result, the Reaniman attacked the young hero with a viciousness that Cecil hadn't been prepared for. He attempted to call them off, but was unable to. At the last possible second, Robot managed to jam the frequency from the sonic weapon. This freed Invincible to act. In a fit of rage, Invincible destroyed the Reaniman and confronted Cecil directly. Cecil was forced to endure the young man's anger, while he was warned not to bother either him or his family again. Time passed. As he performed his duties, Cecil was forced to endure a strained relationship with Invincible. Despite their mutual dislike, Invincible was simply the most powerful hero in the world. Thus, threat after threat forced Cecil to seek out his aid. Then Angstrom Levy set 20 extra-dimensional doppelgangers of Invincible upon the unsuspecting world for 3 terrifying days. It was only the interference of Invincible and his allies that allowed the villain to be defeated. Immediately after that, the viltrumite agent Conquest attempted to pacify the planet. Only Invincible's viltrumite strength was enough to halt his rampage. Cecil realized in that moment that the greatest threat to the planet wasn't necessarily the viltrumite that he knew, but rather the viltrumites that he didn't. With that in mind, he commissioned the creation of a special group of Reaniman. These were created from the corpses of the Invincible doppelgangers. Stedman then sought to mend the relationship he had destroyed with the young hero. He even offered him a position of leadership within the Guardians of the Globe if he would return. Invincible politely refused Cecil's offer, but the two began to take the first tenuous steps towards a truce. And it was just in time for Invincible to once again leave the Earth alongside his treacherous father to participate in the Viltrumite War. Invincible eventually returned to the Earth with no less than Omni-man in tow. He bore news of the end of the immediate viltrumite threat. Cecil was grateful for the information, but realized that all was not as it seemed. Invincible eventually revealed that the 37 remaining viltrumites had taken up residence on the Earth in exchange for the peaceful resolution to the war. Left with little choice, Cecil was forced to accept Invincible's pact with the aliens. Shortly thereafter, Invincible renewed his conflict with the superhuman threat known as Dinosaurus. When he failed to halt Dinosaurus' plan, the entirety of Las Vegas was reduced to glass. Cecil, seeing the destruction as an opportunity, had a massive bank of solar panels built upon the former city. This provided massive amounts of clean energy for the continental United States of America. Shortly thereafter, Cecil managed to capture Dinosaurus in his human form. He imprisoned him deep within the Pentagon. During this time, Cecil and Invincible continued to work on their relationship again, and the two came to an understanding. Cecil realized that somewhere along the line, Invincible had come to see the world in shades of grey. Nothing would be black and white to the youth again. With this in mind, it shouldn't have been a surprise to Cecil when Invincible freed Dinosaurus from his imprisonment. Cecil was forced to name Invincible an enemy of the state and set the Guardians of the Globe after both him and Dinosaurus. But it was truly an empty gesture. He hoped that he could reason with the young man that had somehow become a friend to him. The point was quickly made useless though, when Invincible lost his superhuman abilities due to exposure to the Scourge virus. With Invincible incapacitated, Dinosaurus ran amok. He set in motion a series of events that damaged the polar ice caps. This flooded virtually all of the coastal cities across the planet Earth. Millions were murdered by his actions. Not even Invincible's returned powers could save them all. Cecil, working with Robot and all of the Guardians of the Globe, managed to create a series of artificial moons. These generated gravity fields strong enough to abate the floodwaters and allow the people of the Earth to begin reconstruction. At the end of this event, Invincible surrendered to Cecil. The youth stated plainly that he didn't trust his judgment going forward. Rather than imprison the young man, Cecil was lenient and demanded only one thing from him: a return to their original working agreement. Invincible agreed to Cecil's terms, and the two continued to protect the Earth. Later, after leaving his long life in the Flaxen dimension behind, Robot arrives back on Earth alongside Monster Girl. Cecil helps them both get back up to date on the recent happenings on Earth, such as the destruction of Las Vegas by Dinosaurus. Cecil then offers Robot a new position in the Guardians of the Globe and beyond, that of the coordinator of every superhero team on the planet. Robot accepts Cecil's offer and begins work in his new role immediately. Later, after trapping Invincible in a different dimension, Robot tells no one of his betrayal of Invincible, instead lying to everyone and saying he lost Invincible while hunting for Angstrom. Robot later gains Cecil's permission to access the Global Defense Agency emergency protocols, wanting to analyze and prepare for them when he eventually makes his move. After some time, Invincible eventually arrives back in the dimension, informing Cecil of Robot's treachery soon after. However, Robot had already anticipated this and uses one of his older models of drone construct to confront Mark and Cecil in the Pentagon. Robot explains to both of them that he actually spent close to 1,000 years in the Flaxen dimension with Monster Girl, while also trying to deny Invincible's claims against him. However, Cecil, still suspicious, demands that Robot turn himself in for further questioning. Knowing he has no other choice, Robot activates the same device in his armor that he used to stun Mark in the parallel dimension, using it for the same purpose to momentarily stun Invincible. Before Cecil can even react to this, Robot grabs his former friend and cuts his throat open, while telling Invincible that Cecil's incoming death is on him before curb stomping in Cecil's head, killing him instantly. So, yeah, This was how Cecil Stedman's life ended in the Invincible universe.